CO2 canisters will have threading on them, and then they'll have like a little piece of tin foil over top. That's what's holding the compressed air together. This is a CO2 head. They come in different sizes. This is a very compact one. That's why I like it, but there may be some bigger ones. There may be some that have like the ability to control the flow of the CO2. This one is just your sort of bulk standard, just because it's tiny. I like it in my saddlebag. They all have a needle on the inside. The needle punctures through the little piece of tin foil, and that's what lets the air go in and out. So to start, we're not going to fully thread it on. I'm just going to partially thread it on just to get it started. Grab our tire. Now what I do is I put a piece of tube over top of the CO2. Because it's compressed air, as the air comes out, it's really cold, right? So if you're holding just the canister with bare hands, it's going to get too cold to hold. So sometimes they have like a little beer koozie on them. In my case, I just use an older piece or tube. Sometimes you may want to just like grab whatever you have. Maybe the old tube that it's on the ground, sorry, to just grab it. But yes, it will be very cold as soon as you use it. I forgot about that one. Open the valve up, get this fully on, right? And then you're going to want to inflate this, or sorry, not inflate, screw this all the way in. Nothing will come out just yet because I've screwed it all the way in. It's too tight to let air in, so I'm going to back it off, and that's what's going to inflate it. And that's it.
And
that's the CO2.
Once you tighten it back again, it's going to stop the
Yep. It's actually going to let most of it out, but it's been fully used. And that's it. And as you can see, it's super cold, so I'm going to just put it down because it's a bit too cold. Compressed air will only last in the tire for 24 hours. You actually go up to it the next day and it'll be completely flat. This is just to get you home. You'll have to reinflate it again once you go home. So if you use CO2 and you come back to it next day in the garage and you're like, oh no, I have a flat again, it's most likely because all the compressed air has just gone away. Yeah. You knew that.
No, I did.
Yeah? Yeah, no, it will be flat by tomorrow.
Is that actually frost on the...
On the valve? Yeah. Super simple. So other styles of heads will have like a chuck on them, like a button you push to let the air in and out. Just depends. I like these ones because they're small. That's it.
I just have a CO2 canister. And
don't have the head?
I don't have a head. I didn't know.
Can't really use it. It's good as like a throw it at somebody, but apart from that, it's pretty useless without the head. So.
Yeah. So I think if we just did the M check.
We can do the M check, yeah.
Check and then I think we'll be fine.
Again, we set it in the gear, the last cog, so we just want to push the derailleur back a little bit, get the wheel kind of tucked. We want to get sort of the, not this chain, but this side of the chain lined up with our cog. So just right there. And then it'll roll its way up and it's in. If you had a quick release, you would tighten the quick release. In our case, we have a through axle, which is full of grease, which is not fun. And just slide that through and then just tighten it up. And then that's done. Doesn't want to tighten up. It's a new bike. It's new bike problems. Okay. So normally this doesn't happen, but this derailleur hanger wasn't fully lined up from the factory, so it made threading the hanger back on a bit more difficult. So when your bike's assembled, that is checked. So you probably won't want to run into that problem. But we got to do the wheel again, so it's not the worst thing in the world. There we go. Okay.
Patrick, when you tighten your own drawer, you're just kind of hand tightening it like a...
Well, no, hand tightening is not gonna, sorry, yes, no torque wrench, but, sorry, I was thinking hand tight, just like, no. You wanna make them tight for sure, but you can tighten it just with a tool. You wanna make it as tight enough at home so that you can take it off with your multi-tool. That's the problem I see a lot of people is they have like a little multi-tool. They take a big wrench like this, they make it super tight, and then they're on the side of the road and they can't take it off with their multi-tool because there's not enough leverage. So maybe use your multi-tool to tighten it up, or just practice with the multi-tool a couple times so you know where to tighten it up to. There is a torque recommendation for these, but it's not really that important. So just make them tight, but not super tight. Make sense? Okay, so sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, the multi-tool that you
Yep.
opened up, this one, that doesn't have the tire.
Nope, the tire lever is separate.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The multi-tool that he opened up didn't have the tire remover,
Tire lever is separate.
tire lever
Yeah.
set, right? That's
Yeah.
separate.
Yeah, tire lever, and if you wanted to carry, like, there's small master link pliers you can get if you needed to remove the chain on the side of the road. But again, like I mentioned before, if your chain breaks, you don't need the master link pliers to put the chain back together. It's just a convenience to have in case you do want to remove the chain. Okay, so an M check is just a safety check that you're going to do on a bike. We do it in the shape of an M. It sort of guides you where to check bolts on a bike. We always start at the back of the bike, at the sort of bottom of the M. And what you check at the back of the bike is the axle tightness. So whether that's a through axle or a quick release axle, you go in, you check and make sure that that is tight with your Allen key, or make sure that your quick release axle is tight. By moving it, seeing if it moves easily. If it moves easily, you need to tighten it. If it doesn't move easily, you're good. Well, and then we go up to the saddle here. So start at the bottom, work our way up to the saddle. We check the saddle retention bolt here, make sure that's tight. Different seat posts have different saddle clamp designs. So in this case, it's just be a 5mm Allen key there. Some of them you'll see have bolts at the bottom here. Just take your Allen key and make sure those are tight. That's all it is. Next thing, we'll go to the seat collar here, make sure that's tight. Again, depending on the bike, it'll have different designs. Some will be a collar that goes around here. Some will be a wedge design if you have like a nicer bike, for example, like a nice carbon race bike, or your Roubaix will be actually at the back of the bike here. Just start learning where your bike's bolts are that you need to check. This is torque specific. I would say in a pinch, just make it tight, but if it's carbon, I would say an investment in a torque wrench may not be a bad idea. They will always have torque specifications written on them or close to them. In this case, it's 6.2 Newton meters. It says it actually on the other side here. But yeah, grabbing a torque wrench and I always recommend the click-based torque wrenches, rather than a beam. A beam will just be like a little sort of gauge, and then it'll show you like where 5 and 6 is. With a click, you preset it to the certain torque, and then it will basically, I'll show you actually. This is a click-based one. We sell this one, Spark Tool one. Basically, it will click as soon as you reach the torque, right? So you tighten it, tighten it, tighten it, and then it will click out of place as you reach torque. So don't have to put any thought in it. You can be looking away and tightening it, and you know when it's at its specified torque. So tighten the C-clamp there. Next thing, your pedals and your crank. Wouldn't worry too much about the crank, but some cranks, different designs will have different ways of tightening it. In this case, this is an 8mm. Some of them might be like a Shimano style, which is a bit different. Don't worry too much about the crank. The pedals are the important thing. So either your pedals have a 6 or an 8mm Allen key at the back that you use to tighten, or a pedal wrench. It's a slotted wrench. It's very thin. It looks like this, right? A very thin wrench, and that would fit in between the pedal and the axle. If you try and use a normal box wrench, it'll be too wide and it won't fit between the pedal and the axle. So that's where the pedal wrench comes in. If most of you are riding clipless pedals, they will most likely all have an Allen key style. It's just like older pedals or flat pedals or things like that that will have the pedal wrench based tightening, which is that. Next thing, we move up the bike to the stem. So we need to check the tightness of the stem here, which you would use with your torque wrench or your Allen key. And then we also need to check the faceplate. We also want to check for play in the headset as well. So this whole system, how it works is you'll notice that most of your bikes will have a bolt right at the top here. That's your top cap bolt. That threads into a piece inside the fork that compresses everything together. It compresses your stem, it compresses your spacers, it compresses your headset, it compresses your fork. Puts it all together and makes it nice and tight so there's no play in it. If this is tight, the stem, it's on a steerer. So the fork basically is 2 fork blades. Inside of here, there's a steerer, right? And that's what the stem attaches to. That's what allows you to turn it, right? If the stem is tight and you try tightening this, the stem's not going anywhere because it's tightened to the steerer tube. So you always, to check your torque on your top cap bolt, want to loosen the stem first so that as it's loose, it can get compressed down with everything else. If it's tight, it's not going to get compressed. So just double check that. A way of checking that is you can put the bike on the ground and you can hold the front brake and kind of rock it back and forth. If you notice like excessive play, like it's kind of rocking too much, then that means your headset is loose. Another way of telling is you have spacers. You can try and spin the spacers by hand. And if they're spinning, that means it's not tight enough. It needs to be tightened. So 2 ways, rock it back and forth to feel if there's any play. There'll be play in the tire kind of scooching around a little bit, but if your headset's loose, you'll kind of know right away because there'll be lots of play back and forth in the headset. And then try and spin the spacers. If you can spin the spacers on your bike, it's most likely not tight enough. So loosen the 2 stem bolts here, tighten this guy down. You don't have to reef on it, but you just have to get it tight enough to where you don't feel that there's any play in the headset or you can spin the spacers anymore. So you can't rock it or spin, okay? And then once that's done, then you can tighten these guys. Obviously you wanna make sure, because this will turn side to side once it's loose, that it's nice and straight with the wheel. So normally what I do, I stand over the bike and I kind of just look down and then sort of tighten it from there. Last thing, obviously, is gonna be the front wheel. Just making sure the axle is tight. And so that's an M check, makes the shape of an M. So rear axle, saddle, seat collar, crank pedals, headset, axle, and that is an M. Easy way to remember it. Okay? Any questions on the M check?
Yeah, Patrick, what happens if your saddle keeps going down?
Could be a multitude of different issues. Carbon seat post, is that what you have? So could be there's a lack of carbon prep, which is like a fine paste that acts as a friction layer between the seat post and the frame, and that prevents it from sliding down. What bike do you have?
I have a Roubaix.
Roubaix?
Sorry, not a Roubaix, an Athos.
Athos, okay. It's a round seat post.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't be slipping, so I would bring it in and double check to make sure
Okay.
it's all okay. Sometimes with D-shaped or sort of arrow seat posts, right? They're not round, they have like an arrow shaping to them. And it's a wedge design for clamping rather than a collar. So it would fit inside of here and it's a wedge, so it pushes up against it rather than clamping around it. Sometimes if they're not torqued properly or you hit like a big bump, they can sometimes move a little bit and slide down. So it's not a bad idea to, if you do have that style of bike, to get a torque wrench and check the torque every once in a while, because we tend to find they do come a little loose over time. This is a tried and tested design with the seat collar clamp. This never basically comes loose. Do check it, because it's a critical piece of your bike every once in a while. I would do the M check every like few months. Just double check the bolts, make sure everything's tight. Because as you ride, that creates vibration, bolts come loose from vibration, right? And if you don't feel comfortable doing the M check, bring it to me. I can do it in a minute, make sure everything's tight. Or any bike shop really can do that.
Any other questions about anything today?
No. Thank you.
Just one quick question about the brakes. This one has disc brakes.
Yep.
Mostly, I think all of us have disc brakes. Which one is better? Is it rim brake or disc brake?
I would say disc brake, but there's more maintenance and complication involved. Maintenance is a sort of debatable topic because they tend to last longer in bad weather versus rim brakes, because you have to imagine this is, especially with hydraulic disc brakes, this is a sealed system. So there's no way for dirt or grime to get into the system. With a cabled system, there's a cable going through a piece of housing that's exposed to the elements sometimes, so that can get gunk inside of it and the braking will feel worse. The other benefit to disc brakes is they're self-adjusting. So as the pad material wears away, the pistons, which is in the hydraulic caliper, are self-adjusting. So they'll move in and adjust for the pad wearing away as you ride. So you always get the same lever feel no matter if your brake pads are 100% or 50%. Versus rim brakes, obviously, as they wear away, you have to constantly make adjustments. But rim brakes are much simpler for the at-home mechanic to work on.
How do you know when your disc brake pads are worn to the point?
Visually, yeah.
Yeah.
SRAM has a fun way of measuring them with like a caliper, but visually you'll just be able to tell. You kind of look inside and you'll be able to see the pad material here, and then if it's sort of not showing anymore or close to not showing anymore, it's probably time to replace your pads. I normally say, depending on conditions you ride in, every 1 to 2 years replace your brake pads. And then every 2 years replace your rotor. The other thing a lot of people forget is the rotor, which is the part that the pads clamp to, also is a wear item. So as you brake, you wear away material in the rotor.
I notice when I ride early in the mornings, my front rotor makes a lot of squealing noise.
Yep.
How do I get rid of that?
Could be a multitude of different things. Is it at the end of your braking cycle that it's making noise, so as you're coming to a stop, or throughout the whole braking cycle?
Throughout the whole braking.
So it might be contamination in the brake pad, or it's wet outside. Some brake pads compounds will make more noise in the wet than others, or it's contaminated, and contaminated basically means the pad material is an organic material. It can absorb oil. If it absorbs oil, basically it's not going to provide the same braking friction that it would if it didn't have the oil in it, and it's going to make a loud banshee type noise. So as you brake, it's going to make kind of sound. So you don't need a bell, but let people know you're coming. But the only way to fix that, unfortunately, is to replace them.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I noticed that the rear will never make that noise,
Yep.
just the front.
Yeah. So sometimes it can happen. You pick up, like you go through a puddle, and there was car oil in the puddle, and it gets onto your brakes. It's just unfortunate, but it can happen. So, yeah, you probably have to replace your front brake pads.
Any other questions?
Overall, disc brakes are a better system just for riding. As you probably, if you've had a rim brake bike and you switch to disc, the braking is a lot better. And then there are better benefits as well, like tire clearance. Can't fit big tires in rim brake calipers, but you can fit big tires in disc brakes because there's no caliper around here to limit the size of the tires. So as we're progressing down with, the trends of cycling, the trend is go bigger on your road bike. Can't do that on a rim brake bike. Can do that on a disc brake bike. So there are benefits for sure.
On an adventure like the one that we're going on, like, is there a roadside issue that you could have with rim brakes?
With rim brakes?
With rim brake? Sorry, with disc brakes? Yeah.
Not really, no. I would get the bike checked out before you go.
Yeah.
Make sure the fluid's topped up if you haven't had your brakes bled in a while. What can happen with travel, and I would suggest this as well, is because it's a hydraulic system, there can't be any air inside or it won't work properly. So if there's pockets of little air bubbles inside the caliper and you put it in a cargo hold and it goes up at altitude will expand that air, and then it will rise to what we call the master cylinder piston, and that'll cause the brake to almost pull to the bar or feel really spongy. So if you do a proper bleed, get rid of all the air in the system, and then that won't happen in flight. And you may be asking, how does air get introduced into the system? As you brake, you create heat. Heat heats up the hydraulic fluid inside, causes gas. Gas turns into air. That's what happens. So if you haven't had them bled in a while and you do heavy braking or anything like that, it's probably time to get them bled. We purge all of the air out, introduce new fluid in, it's good to go. Something I would suggest if you're about to fly, just get them done beforehand.
Is this something we can do at home or no?
No. If you're mechanically handy and you invest in a bleed kit, yes. We have some bleed kits for sale. They're not too expensive, but it's quite a complicated process.
Okay.
And you need experience to do it right. I find that when people do their own bleeding at home, they tend to not bleed it super well. There's still air in the system. It might work fine for everyday use, but then as soon as you get into a plane, then all that air is going to expand from the altitude, and then you're going to get big air issues. So get them bled properly. Not saying you can't do it, but I've seen a lot of at-home bleeds come back.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Cool. Awesome.
That's it.
Excellent.
Thank you.